It's a real pleasure to be here with you at the conference on rethinking aid and subsidies. The work I'm going to describe is one of the first attempts to take experience from the Southern Hemisphere, from Mexico, Brazil, now Africa, South Asia, in a new approach to fighting poverty and rethink whether it could work in high-income, services-rich societies like New York City or Torino or Paris. This idea of rethinking is very important. This kind of work always takes many people to work on. This slide won't mean much to you because you don't know these people, or where they're from, but our work in New York resembles the work in Torino in the sense that it involves the municipality, it involves the foundations, it involves think tanks, and it involves university researchers. So the same kind of team and local partnership that you all are using in Torino, we're using in New York City. The name of the initiative is Opportunity New York City Family Rewards, and it is our version of adapting a conditional cash transfer. You will remember that Franco said that a conditional cash transfer is a transfer of financial resources to a poor family conditioned on a behavior, on meeting a condition. And almost all of the conditions are family investments in the future of the children and themselves, what economists might call investments in human capital. So conditional cash transfers have two goals: immediately reduce poverty, alleviate the financial stress, improve the immediate economic situation, but do it in a way that leads to and incentivizes investments in children and families building their skills and assets. So this is the result of a pilot study, and it involves about 4,750 families in 6 of the poorest communities in New York. And if those of you who've been in New York, they're in the Bronx and in Brooklyn, very poor parts of 2 of New York's big city. Oops, I see, this is it. So that says all the things I just said. The conditional cash transfers are offered in 3 areas. Families can earn money through children's education. If children go to school more than 95% of the time, to reduce absenteeism. If they perform at a proficient level on standardized tests. If parents come in to discuss the test results with their teachers. If children receive are what we call on credit for grade. If they're earning enough credits to graduate high school in a timely fashion. And if parents go to teachers' conferences and things like that, there are monetary incentives to do each of those things. The second domain is in family preventive health care. We do not have a public health insurance system that is available to you all the time. You have to keep reapplying. So there's incentives to stay on health insurance. There's incentives to go to preventive medical and dental checkups. Poor people in the United States are really restricted from good dental care. If you want to see how poor a person is in America, look in their mouth. It's the place where things are worst off. And then, unlike the conditional cash transfers in the Southern Hemisphere, there are incentives for parents to sustain full-time work if they are working full-time, and to complete education and training while employed, if that is possible too. So unlike conditional cash transfers in the Southern Hemisphere, which often are a fewer number of incentives for more money. We have a larger number of incentives. Each of them add up to a little bit of money. Over the first 2 years of the work in New York, almost all families earned some rewards. They met some conditions. 65% every 2 months. They made on average about $3,000 extra dollars a year. It ranged from $1,000 to $6,000, but the average was $3,000. And 44% of the rewards that they got were for education, 38% for health, and 18% for workforce. So this is what is meant by a holistic conditional cash transfer. It's trying to incentivize many things in a family's life. As William said, human life is complex, family life is complex, and there's many parts to it. The findings I'm going to briefly summarize in 2 stages. My colleague Jim Riccio and colleagues presented the core findings, and I'll briefly describe how to read each of these tables. The blue bars on the left are the results for the families receiving the conditional cash transfers I just described. The green bars for the right are for the families who were randomly assigned to the regular welfare regime in New York City. So this is the result of what's called a randomized clinical trial, where some families are randomized to get the new regime of conditional cash transfers and some are not. And as you see, the opportunities in New York City decreased poverty by 16%, an 11-point decrease. 59% of the families still lived below the poverty line in the conditional cash transfer group, but 70% of the controls under the normal condition lived under it. There was an even bigger decrease in extreme poverty. So our poverty line is about $20,000 for a family of 4 for 1 year. So, and extreme poverty is living on less than $10,000 for a family of 4. So the conditional cash transfers had a bigger effect on extreme poverty. Many of the economic hardships that families would experience. Fewer families experienced food insufficiency. Fewer families felt they could not make ends meet. More families felt their situation was better now than it was a year ago. And fewer families reported not getting the medical attention they needed because they didn't have enough money to get that medical attention. So these things all come under the category of reducing immediate poverty and reducing the stress associated with it. What about human capital? Well, our Mayor Bloomberg, was very interested in this program in part as a way of doing education reform. He wanted to try to improve children's school outcomes based on this. I told him I didn't think that could be done in a year or 2 with this, but he felt it could. It turns out the data supports me, not the mayor. It was very hard to change children's achievement scores. There was no difference. We studied children at 3 ages, in 4th grade, 7th grade, and 9th grade, because they were going to make 3 transitions, from elementary to intermediate school, from intermediate school to high school, and from high school out. So we studied 4 groups of children. This is the results for the 4th graders, and there was no change in attendance, no change in math or language achievement. Same with the 7th graders. No difference between the families who got the conditional cash transfers and the children of the families who didn't. These results resemble the results in many parts of the Southern Hemisphere. It is possible to reduce poverty, and it's possible to get families to invest in their future more, but they don't always lead to what are called final outcomes. Improved health status, improved education status. I Vera can describe more perhaps, but my opinion is in the Southern Hemisphere there's better health results than there are education results across the world. There was one exception. For the older children who were well prepared, relatively well prepared already, there was the expected increase. The mayor was right for the older children. But it was for the older children who already came in proficient in their academic scores. And so among the better prepared children, there was an improvement in attendance, a decrease in grade repetition, more earning credits, and more passing of our state exams. But that wasn't true for the children who were the least proficient before. This points out a very important point, which is you can apply conditional cash transfers with the same incentives to many different types of people. It might have a positive outcome for some people, but not a positive outcome for others, and that might require tailoring. So that's what we're learning there. So there was short-term success in poverty reduction. We saw many early but small and modest effects on some human capital outcomes, but this is still going on, and it's too early to draw final conclusions because the evaluation is going to continue to 2014. We have done one other thing that I think is important to share with you, which is everything I described up till now is based on administrative data that could be collected through the state. We also didn't want to do this and not talk to the children and the families directly. So we surveyed a subsample of children and families with our own special surveys and instruments to really ask 3 questions. What are the effects of conditional cash transfers on what are called the key mediators, or the pathways, the steps to get to good outcomes? And there were many thoughts. Would conditional cash transfers change how parents and children spend their money and their time? Would some critics of the program said, this is going to create stress. Parents are going to put pressure on the children to do well in school because it brings money home. It will be unfair, and the family climate will actually get worse, and there will be fighting and stress. What about school engagement and children's motivation to learn? There was a lot of criticism that if you paid children to go to school, that they would become extrinsically motivated by outside sources, not intrinsically motivated. And there's a whole research tradition that worried about that, so we assessed that. And then what about things that could be improved that weren't just outcomes like education or physical health? What about mental health and problem behaviors? Might increased stress increase depression and anxiety? Or might the extra money be spent on delinquent activities or substance use? Or conversely, could reduced pressure in the family improve the mental health outcomes? So we answered these questions. This is the theory of change for the intervention as a whole, which I just explained to you. And these are the new things that we're adding. We're adding understandings of how families spend their time and money and their interactions, how academically motivated children are, and their mental health and behavioral outcomes. And the results of this sub-study are pretty interesting. Not only did, without any specific reward for asset development, families that were receiving conditional cash transfers the parents spent more money on the children spent less money on themselves, and the bottom says the parents saved more money. About 13% of the parents reported saving more money for their children's educational future. So it changed how families spent their money in a positive direction. It also changed how families spent their time. We did time diaries for the children, And we used a statistic called cluster analysis, that's not important, to identify groups of children who spent their time in similar ways. Were they more academically oriented, more socially oriented, more time on TV and computers, or more time in self-help and self-care? And what you see is that we shifted the proportion of children who were primarily academically oriented from 16% in the control group to 24% in the conditional cash transfer group. And we reduced the amount of time kids were just hanging out from 21% down to 15%. So we changed how families spent their money, we changed how kids spent their time. We did not have positive or negative impacts on how families got on with each other. There was no increase, there was no improvement, no improvement in conflict and no worsening in conflict. No improvement in parent monitoring of their children, nothing worse. Similarly, no improvements in children's actual motivation, although part of that was good because people were afraid that they would become extrinsically motivated. But the final thing is that we did see improvements in children's mental health. Now the children in the program group are going to be the red bars, and the children in the control group are going to be in the yellow bars. And there was a decline in the program group in self-reported delinquency. It wasn't enough to be significant, but there was a decline in how much aggression children experienced and committed, and a big decline, almost cut in half, their self-reported rates of substance use, of alcohol and marijuana. So the conditional cash transfer program had a bigger effect in reducing substance use than many substance abuse prevention programs. It wasn't designed as a mental health program, but it had a positive mental health effect. And it also reduced how often children hung out with peers who were high in substance use. So, and no negative impacts on depression. Children did not become more depressed or anxious by feeling that they were in there. So our conclusions are that this first stage of attempts at a conditional cash transfer affected some, but not all of the pathways that we thought the program could operate through. It did not change how children approached their schooling, except by changing the time they spent on school. The implications are that we're using this kind of information to think about how to redesign the incentives. This was our first effort to think about how some of the things that we didn't have a positive impact on, we could have a positive impact by changing the program. It may well be that these changes in mental health outcomes are among the most important changes we saw. And this local experiment became interesting enough that the Obama administration has supported a second stage of redesigning these and doing them in several other cities. And so we're in the middle of a story, and from New York would like to tell you, share that story in the future and find out what you're doing. Thank you very much.